You never think it's going to happen to you, you know? Those stories you hear from others, the ones that seem like urban legends. People getting stranded on dark roads, running into shady characters. They're the kind of stories that make for good campfire tales or late-night talk over a couple of beers. But when it actually happens to you, it changes everything. That's what happened to me back in 2005, on Route 90 between Uvalde and San Antonio. I was 18, fresh out of high school and feeling invincible, but that night humbled me in ways I never expected. It was supposed to be a simple weekend. My buddy Travis had just moved to San Antonio for college, and I figured a road trip would be a great way to break in the old pickup truck my parents had handed down to me. It wasn't anything fancy, an old Ford from the early 90s, paint peeling in some spots, a couple of dents here and there, but it ran, or at least it did most of the time. The thing about those old trucks is that you never quite know when they're going to quit on you. And of course, that night was one of those nights. I had left Travis's place late, around 10 p.m., thinking I could make it back to Uvalde before midnight if I just stuck to the highway and kept the music going to keep me awake. The air was sticky with Texas heat, even after the sun had long disappeared below the horizon. The headlights from my truck barely pierced through the thick darkness that seemed to swallow up Route 90. You have to understand, it's not like the highways near big cities. This stretch of road is desolate, no lights, no houses for miles. Just endless stretches of scrubby brush and the occasional cactus. I should have known better. I hadn't checked the gas gauge when I left Travis's, and by the time I realized how low I was running, it was too late. The truck sputtered once, then twice, before coasting to a stop. I banged my hand on the steering wheel, frustrated with myself. It was stupid, so damn stupid. I grabbed my phone, hoping maybe I could call for help, but of course, there was no signal. Just my luck, right? I sat there for a moment, trying to figure out what to do. The night was unnervingly quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person left on Earth. I rolled down the windows, trying to catch a breeze, but the air outside was just as stagnant as inside the cab. I thought about getting out and walking, but to where? I hadn't seen another car for at least half an hour, and there was no telling how far the nearest gas station was. That's when I saw him. At first, it was just a shadow moving in the distance, barely noticeable against the darkness. I squinted, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light, or a lack thereof, but as the figure got closer, it became clear that it was a man. He was walking down the side of the road, coming from the opposite direction. My first thought was relief. Maybe he could help. Maybe he had a phone that worked, or at least knew where the nearest gas station was. But as he approached, something felt off. He wasn't in any rush, just slowly ambling towards me like he had all the time in the world. His clothes were dark, and I couldn't make out much of his face in the dim light, but there was something unsettling about his posture, like he was too calm, too deliberate in the way he moved. Still, I figured I didn't have much of a choice. I needed help, and he was the first person I'd seen in miles. I rolled down the window just as he came up beside the truck. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at me with this strange, almost vacant expression. "Hey man," I started, trying to sound casual, though my voice wavered a bit. "Truck ran out of gas. You happen to know where the nearest station is?" He didn't answer immediately, just kept staring at me with those cold eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "You stranded?" His voice was low, almost too low to hear over the silence of the night. There was something in the way he said it that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a nervous laugh. "Stupid mistake. Thought I had more gas." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "You got any money on you?" That was when the pit formed in my stomach. His tone had shifted, subtle but noticeable. The way he asked wasn't out of curiosity or concern. It was a demand, plain and simple. I suddenly realized how vulnerable I was. Here I was, stuck in the middle of nowhere, no cell service, and this guy, whoever he was sizing me up. I shook my head, trying to play it cool. "Nah, just a broke college kid, man." Got a couple of bucks for gas, that's about it. His expression didn't change. If anything, it became more intense. He leaned closer to the window, and I could see his face more clearly now. His skin was pale, almost ghostly under the moonlight, and there was a thin scar running down the side of his cheek. His eyes were dark, hollow. "Empty your pockets," he said, his voice firm now, all pretense of casual conversation gone. I felt a jolt of fear shoot through me. This wasn't just some guy trying to help out a stranded motorist. He was here to rob me, maybe worse. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I could give him the few bucks I had, but something told me that wouldn't be enough. He didn't seem like the type to just walk away satisfied. I swallowed hard, keeping my hands on the steering wheel. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." "Empty your pockets," he repeated, leaning even closer now, his breath hot against my face. That's when I knew I had to make a decision. Fast. In that heartbeat, everything shifted. My instincts kicked in, drowning out the panic that surged through me. I didn't want to hand over my wallet, my phone. Everything I had that tied me to the world was in that truck. But I also didn't want to end up as another headline in some small-town newspaper. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the sound almost deafening in the suffocating silence of the night. "Listen, man," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can get you some cash. I just need to get to the next gas station." His eyes narrowed, and he straightened up, looking around as if weighing his options. I took a deep breath, trying to think clearly. I could either comply, handing over whatever little cash I had, or I could risk it all. I glanced to my left, and spotted a small patch of woods just beyond the shoulder of the road. If I made a run for it, maybe I could lose him among the trees. Suddenly, I pushed the door open and bolted, my feet pounding against the gravel as adrenaline surged through me. I heard him shout something behind me, but I didn't turn around. I just ran. I could hear his footsteps pounding after me, gaining ground with every stride. The darkness swallowed me whole as I dove into the woods, branches scratching against my arms and legs, the underbrush tugging at my clothes. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to put as much distance as possible between him and me. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the sound of my pursuer's footsteps echoing behind me. "Get back here!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the night air like a knife. "You think you can run away?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just kept moving, my feet finding purchase as I dodged trees and jumped over fallen logs. The further I went, the more the forest enveloped me in darkness. I could barely see, but the sounds of nature filled my ears, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and my heart hammering like a drum. Then, suddenly, I tripped. I went down hard, tumbling over a thick root and landing on the ground with a thud. Pain shot through my knees and palms, but I didn't stop to assess the damage. I scrambled to my feet and pressed on, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. "Come on, man!" I heard him shout again, closer now. "I'm just trying to help you." Help? The irony of his words twisted in my stomach. He wasn't here to help me. He was here to take everything from me. I knew that now. I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The trees felt like they were closing in around me, the shadows twisting and turning into grotesque shapes as panic surged again. Just then, I heard the crack of a branch behind me. I turned to glance over my shoulder, and in that split second, I caught sight of him breaking through the trees, a menacing figure with wild eyes and an angry sneer. He was closer than I thought. I felt my heart drop as I realized he was gaining on me. "Stop running!" he shouted, his voice tinged with frustration. "You'll just make it worse for yourself." In the growing darkness, the woods felt alive, breathing with each rustle and whisper. I was losing my bearings, the fear clouding my judgment. But I forced myself to focus, to think of anything that could help me get away. I scanned the area around me, looking for any place to hide, any way to outsmart him. Then I spotted it, a narrow ravine just off to my right. I quickly darted toward it, slipping down into the slight dip, The ground was soft and muddy, the smell of damp earth filling my nostrils. I crouched low, pressing my back against the cool, wet earth, praying he wouldn't see me. I could hear him getting closer, his breathing ragged as he searched for me. "Come on! I'm not going to hurt you! Just come out, and we can talk!" he called out, his voice echoing eerily through the trees. I bit my lip, trying to keep my breath steady. "Just breathe," I told myself. "Just breathe." For what felt like an eternity, I sat there, my heart pounding in my ears as I listened to him pace above me. The underbrush rustled as he moved around, searching for any sign of me. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but sit there and wait, but I knew that was the only option I had right now. He would eventually move on, and I could get back to my truck and drive away. I could hear him muttering to himself, frustration lacing his words. "You think you can just disappear? You think I won't find you?" My heart raced at his words. I glanced around, looking for a way out of this nightmare. The ravine seemed to continue a little further down, and I realized that if I could quietly maneuver through the underbrush, I might be able to find another way out. I waited until the sounds of his footsteps faded slightly, then I slowly crawled deeper into the ravine, moving as silently as possible. As I moved away from him, I felt the tension in my chest loosen just a little. I focused on each movement, every snap of a twig beneath my feet, every rustle of leaves. I just needed to keep moving until I found a way back to the highway. After what felt like hours, I finally emerged from the thicket on the other side of the ravine. I looked around cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of him. The woods were quiet now, eerily so. I could hear nothing but the wind rustling through the trees. I took a moment to catch my breath, feeling a mix of exhaustion and adrenaline coursing through me. I had to keep going. I had to make it back to my truck and call for help. Just as I began to step away from the thicket, I heard a crack of a branch behind me. My blood ran cold. He had found me again. "Where are you?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the trees. I froze, terror coursing through me. I had to act fast. I turned on my heel and sprinted toward what I hoped was the direction of the highway, praying that I could outpace him one more time. The woods blurred around me as I ran, my lungs burning with each gasping breath. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, felt amplified in the silence of the night. I didn't dare look back. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind me, gaining ground with every frantic step I took. The thought of being caught, of facing him again, sent adrenaline surging through my veins. I pushed myself harder, forcing my legs to move faster despite the pain shooting through my knees. My heart pounded like a war drum, each beat screaming for me to keep going. I had to get to the highway. I had to find safety. Then, I spotted a faint light flickering through the trees ahead. Hope bloomed within me, and I veered toward it, willing my body to keep moving. The light grew brighter as I approached, revealing a small clearing. I burst into the open, momentarily blinded by the glow. It was a gas station, a lone beacon of civilization in the vast darkness. I was nearly there. But as I stepped into the clearing, I felt a rush of air behind me. I turned just in time to see him emerging from the shadows, his figure silhouetted against the light. Panic coursed through me. I sprinted toward the gas station, adrenaline pushing me forward. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice breaking the eerie stillness of the night. "Help! Somebody help me!" The gas station was closed, but the parking lot was lit up, illuminating the area around me. I glanced back, and for the first time, I saw the look on his face, a twisted mix of anger and desperation. He was still coming after me, and the realization sent a wave of terror crashing over me. "Stop running!" he shouted, his voice ragged with exertion. "You don't need to make this worse." I didn't stop. I couldn't. I sprinted toward the nearest building, a small convenience store, praying it was unlocked. I reached the door and yanked on the handle, but it didn't budge. I slammed my shoulder against it, my heart racing as I felt the cool metal against my skin. "Let me in!" I screamed, desperation fueling my efforts. The man was gaining on me, his footsteps pounding the pavement. I heard the screech of his breath as he pushed himself harder, and I knew I was running out of time. I glanced over my shoulder just as he lunged forward, his hand outstretched toward me. In a flash, I ducked to the side, barely avoiding his grasp. I dashed around the corner of the building, praying there was another way in. My mind raced as I scanned the area, searching for any form of escape. "Come on!" I muttered under my breath, desperately looking for a window or another entrance. I saw a side door and made a beeline for it. I tried the handle. It was locked. Frustration boiled within me as I banged my fists against it. "Let me in!" I shouted again, my voice echoing into the night. Suddenly, I heard a car engine rumbling in the distance. My heart leaped at the sound. I turned my head toward the road, willing whoever was inside to see me, to help me. The headlights of the car bounced off the pavement, illuminating the area just as I heard him again. "You can't run forever!" he shouted, his voice growing closer. "Just give it up!" With no time to spare, I dashed back around the corner, desperate to avoid him. I spotted a large dumpster next to the building and scrambled behind it, squeezing myself into the narrow space. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me. I could hear his footsteps approaching, the sound growing louder as he moved closer. I peeked out from behind the dumpster, my heart racing. I saw him pause, scanning the area, looking for any sign of me. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Just then, the car I had heard earlier pulled into the parking lot. The headlights flooded the area with light, casting long shadows across the ground. I watched as a couple stepped out of the vehicle, oblivious to the danger lurking in the darkness. My heart raced at the sight of potential help. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice hoarse from fear. "Help! Please!" The couple turned, their faces etched with confusion as they looked around. I felt a surge of hope, and I was about to yell again when I heard him shout behind me. "There you are!" I froze. He had spotted me. I could see his figure darting toward my hiding place, a look of fury on his face. The couple turned to look as well, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm as they took in the scene unfolding before them. "Get in the car!" I screamed, desperate for their help. Without hesitation, the man rushed back toward his car while the woman fumbled for her phone. "Call the police!" she shouted, her voice trembling. The guy jumped into the driver's seat, and I could see him reaching for something. Maybe a weapon, maybe just the ignition. I heard the man behind me rushing closer, and in a moment of sheer instinct, I bolted out from behind the dumpster. I sprinted toward the car, shouting for the couple to hurry. My heart pounded as I heard his footsteps close behind me. Just as I reached the passenger side of the vehicle, I heard him shout again. "You can't escape! Just let me help you!" I glanced back, adrenaline fueling my movements. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside just as he lunged for me. The driver hit the gas, and the tires squealed against the pavement, sending us racing away from danger. "Drive! Go!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the small space as I turned to look back at the man, now just a dark silhouette receding into the distance. "What just happened?" the driver asked, his eyes wide with shock. "I don't know," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "He tried to rob me. I thought he was going to hurt me." The woman in the passenger seat reached for my hand, squeezing it tight. "You're safe now," she said, her voice calm but shaky. "We'll call the police when we get to town." The driver nodded, his expression shifting from shock to determination. "Hang on. I'm getting you out of here." As we sped away, the weight of what had just happened crashed down on me. I leaned back against the seat, tears stinging my eyes as the adrenaline slowly faded. I had survived, but the fear still lingered like a dark cloud over my mind. The couple kept talking, trying to reassure me as we drove further away from the chaos. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. They didn't have to stop, but they did. I was thankful for their kindness, for their bravery in the face of danger. Eventually, we reached the nearest town, and I could see the lights of the police station glowing in the distance. Relief flooded through me. I was going to be okay. As we pulled up to the station, the couple helped me out of the car, and I stumbled toward the door. I felt exhausted, shaken to my core, but I was alive. I would tell my story, and I would make sure that man couldn't hurt anyone else. In that moment, I realized something important. Survival isn't just about running away from danger. It's also about the people who stand up to help. I was grateful to have found them when I needed it the most. The darkness of that night would never fully leave me, but I knew I would carry on, and I would learn to be stronger. I've never been the type to believe in the supernatural or strange coincidences. You know, those weird, unsettling things you hear about in small towns. I guess you could say I'm a practical person. But something happened to me last year that still sends chills down my spine when I think about it. It was the beginning of autumn in rural North Carolina, and I was driving home after a long night shift at the hospital. It was one of those nights where the air was so still it almost felt like you could cut through it with a knife. The road was empty, just dark patches of asphalt disappearing into the distance. The trees lining the highway were thick and towering, casting ominous shadows across the road. I didn't think much of it at first. Rural life was like that. Quiet. Isolated. I worked late a lot back then, so driving home at night was nothing new. It was peaceful, actually, when you're alone, and the world feels like it's resting. But that night, it felt different. Eerier, somehow. Around halfway through my drive, I noticed my fuel gauge dropping faster than usual. It didn't make any sense because I just filled up at a gas station before leaving town. Still, I didn't think too much of it. I figured maybe I'd hit a rough patch of road or something, and I'd deal with it when I got closer to home. As I drove deeper into the countryside, the trees grew denser, and the road more desolate. My headlights barely seemed to penetrate the darkness. Then, without warning, the car started to sputter. I glanced at the dashboard again, and my heart sank. My fuel gauge was dangerously close to empty. I pulled over to the side of the road, hoping it was just a glitch, but the car died completely. I tried starting it again. Nothing. It was dead. Panic bubbled in my chest. I was in the middle of nowhere, no cell service, and no one around for miles. I cursed under my breath and stepped out of the car. The air was cold against my skin, biting at my arms through my light jacket. I popped the hood, though I knew there wasn't much I could do. Mechanics were never my strong suit, and I sure as hell wasn't going to fix whatever had gone wrong out here. As I stood there, staring helplessly at my engine, a memory hit me. Earlier that night, while I was at the gas station, I noticed someone watching me. A man, leaning against an old pickup truck, his eyes following my every move. At the time, I brushed it off as just another curious local. People around here could be like that, watchful, but not in a creepy way. Or at least that's what I thought. But now, in the pitch-black darkness, that memory felt more ominous. Could he have followed me? Was it just a coincidence that my car had broken down not long after I'd seen him? My heart pounded harder in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As I stood there contemplating my options, a faint light appeared in the distance. Headlights, slowly making their way down the road toward me. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by unease. What if it was him? The man from the gas station? I didn't have time to dwell on it. The car approached and slowed as it neared me. It was an old beat-up sedan, its headlights flickering slightly as it came to a stop a few feet away. The window rolled down, and a man leaned out, his face shadowed in the dim light. "You all right there, miss?" His voice was gruff, with a hint of something I couldn't quite place, maybe suspicion? Or was it curiosity? Either way, I didn't like it. Yeah? I'm fine. Just some car trouble," I replied, trying to sound confident, even though my voice wavered slightly. "Need a ride somewhere? There's not much around here, and it's gonna be a long walk to the nearest town." I hesitated. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to trust him. There was something off about the way he looked at me. His eyes were too sharp, too focused, like a predator eyeing its prey. But what choice did I have? My car was dead, I had no phone service, and no idea how far the next gas station was. I'll wait for a tow truck, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me for a long moment, the silence between us thick and heavy. Then, without a word, he put his car in reverse and slowly backed away, his headlights disappearing into the darkness. I let out a shaky breath, relief flooding my body. But it didn't last long. I turned back to my car, and that's when I saw it. A small puddle forming under the rear of the vehicle. I crouched down, my heart racing, and shone my flashlight on it. My stomach dropped. It wasn't oil. It was gas. Someone had cut my fuel line. My mind raced, piecing together the events of the night. The man at the gas station. The car breaking down. The offer for a ride. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone had done this on purpose. I had to get out of there. Looking around, I noticed a faint glow in the distance, just beyond the trees. A house, maybe. It was my only option. I grabbed my bag and started walking, my footsteps crunching on the gravel road as I hurried toward the light. Every noise in the woods made me jump, my heart thundering in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone, or something, was out there in the darkness, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the house. It was old, weathered, with peeling paint and a sagging porch. But the lights were on, and that was all that mattered. I knocked on the door, my knuckles trembling as they made contact with the wood. A few moments later, the door creaked open, and a woman in her late 50s stood in the doorway, her expression cautious. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but guarded. "My car broke down," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I need to use a phone." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Come in." I stepped inside, the warmth of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. The woman led me to the living room, where a rotary phone sat on a small table near the couch. "You can use that," she said, watching me closely. I picked up the receiver, but before I could dial, something stopped me. A strange feeling, a gut instinct, told me not to make the call. Something wasn't right here. Something about this house, about this woman, felt wrong. And then I saw it, the glass of water she'd placed on the table in front of me. The glass of water gleamed faintly in the dim light of the living room. For a moment, I just stared at it, my hand frozen halfway to the phone. The woman's eyes followed my gaze, her expression unreadable. "Go ahead, drink. You must be thirsty after walking all the way here," she said, her voice too calm, too polite for the situation. Her words hung in the air like a dare, challenging me to take a sip. I didn't trust it. There was something unnerving about her hospitality, something that gnawed at the back of my mind. I just met this woman, yet she was already too comfortable, too eager to offer me a drink. The same gut feeling that had kept me from getting into that strange man's car was now telling me to stay on guard. I let my fingers brush the glass lightly, but I didn't lift it to my lips. "Thank you," I muttered, pretending to focus on dialing the phone, even though my hands were trembling. My eyes flickered up to meet hers, and I could see it now. Her eyes weren't soft or kind, they were cold, watching me too intently, as if she was studying my every move. I dialed my husband's number, praying to God that he'd answer despite the patchy reception in these parts. The line rang once, twice, then static. I cursed silently under my breath and tried again. The same thing, just a hollow, crackling noise. "Trouble with the phone?" the woman asked, her voice almost too casual, like she was expecting it. "Yeah, it's just, I'm not getting a good signal," I lied, still holding the receiver to my ear, though I knew it was useless. My pulse was racing now, and I was keenly aware of how alone I was, stranded in a stranger's house, with no way to reach anyone. "Well, there's no rush," she said, settling into the worn armchair across from me. Her hands rested on the arms of the chair, her fingers tapping lightly in a slow, deliberate rhythm. "You're welcome to stay here until help arrives." It's dangerous to be out there all by yourself, you know. Dangerous. The word echoed in my mind. I glanced at the front door, the only visible exit, but it seemed so far away. I felt like I was trapped, the walls of the house closing in on me, suffocating me. I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. I appreciate it, but I think I'll just wait in my car. I've got some blankets in the trunk. I'll be fine. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Are you sure? It's awfully cold out there, and there are animals in these woods. Animals? It was an odd thing to say. I could hear the tension in her voice now, that subtle shift from friendly concern to something darker, something more insistent. I'll be all right, I said quickly, rising from the couch, pretending not to notice how my legs wobbled beneath me. Thank you for letting me use the phone. Before she could respond, I started toward the door, my heart pounding in my ears. But as I reached for the doorknob, I heard a loud creak behind me. The woman stood up abruptly, her chair groaning as she pushed it back. Wait, she said, her voice sharp now, a hint of desperation creeping into it. At least take some water with you. You shouldn't leave without something to drink. I froze, my hand gripping the cold metal of the doorknob. The glass of water. She hadn't stopped talking about it. My mind raced, the pieces slowly fitting together. Why was she so fixated on me drinking that water? What had she put in it? I turned slowly to face her. Her face was no longer friendly or welcoming. Her eyes were dark, predatory, like the man's at the gas station. It was as if the mask she'd been wearing had finally slipped, and I was seeing her true self for the first time. I'm not thirsty, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For a second, we just stood there in silence, the tension thick in the air. Then, without warning, she lunged toward me. Instinct kicked in. I yanked the door open and bolted out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. My feet pounded against the gravel driveway as I ran toward the woods, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Behind me, I could hear her shouting, her footsteps slapping against the porch as she chased after me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could think about was getting as far away from that house as possible. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were on fire, but I kept running, the trees blurring past me as I plunged deeper into the woods. Branches snagged at my clothes, tearing at my skin, but I didn't stop. I couldn't shake the image of her face, that cold, calculating stare as she watched me. What had she planned for me? Why had she been so insistent on me staying, on drinking that water? My mind was racing with questions, but none of it mattered now. All that mattered was getting away. After what felt like hours, I finally slowed down, gasping for air as I stumbled to a stop. The woods were silent around me, except for the sound of my ragged breathing. I leaned against a tree, my body trembling from both fear and exhaustion. My head was spinning, and I felt like I might collapse at any moment. But then, in the distance, I heard something. A faint rustling. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching through the leaves. My heart stopped. I wasn't alone. For a split second, I considered hiding, but there was nowhere to go. The trees were sparse here, and the underbrush was too thin to offer any real cover. So I did the only thing I could do. I started running again. But this time, the footsteps were getting closer. I pushed myself harder, my legs screaming in protest as I sprinted through the trees. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, faster, as if whoever, or whatever, was chasing me was gaining on me. Then, suddenly, I saw it, a faint light through the trees. A road, maybe? Or another house. Either way, it was my only chance. I veered toward the light, praying that it wasn't another trap. As I broke through the tree line, I stumbled onto a dirt road, lit only by the dim glow of a nearby street lamp. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. I could still hear the footsteps behind me, closer now, almost right on top of me. I turned to look over my shoulder, and that's when I saw him, the man from the gas station. He was there, standing at the edge of the woods, watching me. His eyes locked onto mine, and a slow, sinister smile crept across his face. My blood ran cold. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I ran. I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but none of that mattered. Behind me, I could still hear him, his footsteps fast and purposeful, pounding through the dirt road. The man from the gas station. He was here, just like I had feared. And this time, I had nowhere left to hide. The dim glow of the street lamp flickered as I sprinted down the road. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. The sound of my heart was deafening in my ears, and every breath I took felt like it might be my last. I had never known terror like this before. Every time I looked back, he was closer, his dark silhouette looming larger, his footsteps growing louder and faster. That smile, God, that smile, haunted me. It was as if he knew something I didn't, like he had already planned out how this would end. The road seemed endless, stretching into the dark, but there was no sign of any houses, no other cars, nothing but the oppressive blackness of the North Carolina woods and the sound of that man chasing me. A part of me wondered if this was how it was all going to end. If I'd ever see my husband again, if anyone would even know what happened to me. I pushed that thought down. I had to stay focused. I had to survive. And then, just as I felt like my legs would give out, I saw it, faint headlights in the distance, cutting through the darkness. A car was coming, slowly making its way down the road toward me. For a moment, hope flared in my chest, but I wasn't safe yet. What if it was someone else? What if it was another part of this sick plan? But I couldn't stop now. I had no choice. I waved my arms wildly, screaming at the top of my lungs. Help! Help me, please! The car's headlights slowed, and it came to a stop a few feet away. The door opened, and a man stepped out, his figure barely visible against the glaring light. He looked normal, just a guy, maybe in his 40s, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. My heart pounded with hope and fear. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm, but there was a slight edge of concern in it. I ran up to him, gasping for air, trying to find the words. "Please, you have to help me. There's a man, he's chasing me. He's back there." I pointed frantically behind me, but when I turned to look, the man from the gas station was gone. The road was empty. The woods were still. It was like he had vanished into thin air. For a moment, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The man in the flannel glanced down the road, then back at me, his brow furrowed. "Are you sure? I don't see anyone." "He was just there," I insisted, my voice shaking. "He's been following me all night. He cut my fuel line, he tried to get me into his car. Please, I swear I'm not making this up." The man's face softened a little, and he nodded. All right, calm down. Get in the car, I'll take you to the police station." Relief washed over me. I didn't even think twice. I climbed into the passenger seat, and the moment I slammed the door shut, I felt like I could breathe again. The man got back into the driver's seat, turning the car around, heading back toward town. For a while, we drove in silence, the rhythmic hum of the engine the only sound. I stared out the window, half expecting to see that sinister figure emerge from the woods again, but there was nothing. Just the darkness, closing in around us as we sped away from the nightmare. After a few minutes, the man spoke up. "You live around here?" "No," I said, my voice still shaky. "I was driving home from work when my car broke down. I live about an hour away." He nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "It's a quiet area, not many people out this way. You're lucky I was passing through." "Yeah," I muttered, though the word, lucky, didn't quite feel right. I wasn't sure how to explain it, but something still felt off. Maybe it was the adrenaline wearing off, or maybe it was just a lingering paranoia from the night's events. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't out of danger yet. The road stretched on, and I watched the woods pass by in a blur. I didn't want to look at my phone. I didn't want to check the time. I just wanted to get home, to forget this night ever happened. "By the way," I said, trying to distract myself, "do you know that house down the road?" The old one with the peeling paint? I stopped there earlier. The woman, she seemed strange. The man didn't respond right away. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, and for the first time since I'd gotten in the car, I noticed the faint smell of something odd, like gasoline. My stomach dropped. I glanced at his hands again, and that's when I saw it. Dark stains on his fingers. Like oil. Or grease. The same kind of stain you'd get from cutting a fuel line. My heart stopped. I looked at his face, really looked this time. The faint light from the dashboard illuminated his features, and my blood turned to ice. It was him. The man from the gas station. The same cold, predatory eyes. The same slow, sinister smile creeping across his lips. My hand reached for the door handle, but it was locked. He turned to me, his smile widening. "You didn't really think I'd let you get away, did you?" His voice was low, menacing. Panic surged through me, and I slammed my fists against the window, screaming for help. But the road was deserted, the night too dark, and my voice felt like it was swallowed by the emptiness around us. The car sped up, the tires screeching as he swerved off the main road, heading deeper into the woods. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. I couldn't let him take me. I couldn't let this be how it ended. I felt around for anything I could use. My hand brushed against the seatbelt buckle, and without thinking, I unlatched it, leaning forward like I was about to throw up. His hand shot out to grab me, but I moved quicker, slamming my elbow into his face with all the strength I had left. The car veered violently as he cursed, his hands slipping off the wheel. I grabbed the door handle again, yanking it open just as the car lurched to the side, crashing into a tree. I was thrown from the vehicle, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through my body, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let him get to me. I scrambled to my feet, my vision blurry, and started running again, this time deeper into the woods. The darkness swallowed me whole, and I could hear him cursing behind me, the sound of him trying to pull himself from the wreckage. I didn't stop. I couldn't. My body screamed in pain, but I forced myself forward, tripping over roots, pushing through branches. And then, as if by some miracle, I saw it, the flicker of blue and red lights through the trees. A police car. I screamed, waving my arms, stumbling toward the lights. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of doors opening, voices shouting, and the blinding light of a flashlight in my face. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic. My husband was there, his face pale with worry, holding my hand. The police told me they found the man's car wrecked in the woods, but he was gone. Vanished. They're still looking for him. The woman from the house? She was never found either. Some people say there was never a woman living in that house to begin with, that it's been abandoned for years. I still don't know what really happened that night. Whether it was a series of coincidences, or something darker, something that defies explanation. But I do know one thing, I'll never drive down that road again. It was a freezing December evening, and the wind howled like something alive as I navigated the winding backroads. I had just finished my first semester of college, and was on my way home for winter break. I was in good spirits, ready to unwind after the whirlwind of finals. But that joy turned sour as I glanced down at the dashboard of my old, beat-up Honda and saw the fuel gauge needle stubbornly hovering over E. I cursed under my breath, my heart sinking. I had a terrible habit of letting the tank run down to nearly empty before filling up. Now, on this desolate road in the middle of nowhere, my reckless habit was about to bite me in the ass. The area was completely unfamiliar. I had taken a shortcut to avoid highway traffic, thinking it would shave some time off my journey. Instead, it left me stranded. With no streetlights to guide me and no cell service, I pulled over as the car sputtered to a stop. The darkness outside was thick, pressing in on all sides, and the only light came from the soft glow of my dashboard. The empty road stretched ahead like an endless ribbon of blackness. I knew I was alone out here. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. My breath fogged up the windows as I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, unsure of what to do next. Should I wait and hope someone passed by? Should I start walking, though I had no idea where the nearest town was? Minutes ticked by, and the cold was seeping through my jacket, biting into my skin. I shivered, wondering if I could just stay in the car until morning. But the thought of sitting here all night with no heat, and no way to call for help sent a wave of panic through me. Then, out of nowhere, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. At first, I was relieved. Maybe this was my ticket out of here. But as the car drew closer, a sense of unease crept up my spine. The headlights moved slowly, too slowly, as if the driver were scoping out the scene. My pulse quickened as the vehicle, an old black sedan, rolled to a stop right behind my car. I held my breath as the driver's side door creaked open, and a tall figure emerged. He stood there for a moment, his face shadowed by the beam of his headlights. I could just make out his silhouette, broad-shouldered and bulky, the kind of build that made you feel small and vulnerable in comparison. "Need some help?" His voice was deep, almost too casual for the situation. I hesitated, my fingers trembling on the door handle. There was something off about him, though I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. Maybe it was the way he loomed in the darkness, or how his voice lacked any real warmth. But I was alone, and it was either accept his help or stay stranded in the freezing cold all night. I cracked the window slightly, my breath visible in the air between us. "Yeah, I ran out of gas. I've got a gas can in my trunk," he said, his grin just barely visible under the dim glow of the streetlight, which flickered weakly overhead. "I can give you a ride to the next station. It's only a few miles down the road." I glanced at my phone, hoping for a miracle, but of course, the screen showed, "No service," in mocking letters. "I don't know." I started, trying to buy some time. "Come on," he urged, his voice more insistent. "You'll freeze out here." He wasn't wrong. It was well below freezing, and I could already feel my toes going numb. Reluctantly, I grabbed my bag and opened the door. As I stepped out, the cold air slapped me hard, making me gasp. He led me to his car, opening the passenger side door for me. His sedan was old, worn out, like it had seen too many miles and too many years. The smell of stale cigarettes hit me as I slid into the seat, and an uneasy feeling settled deep in my gut. He walked around to the driver's side and climbed in. The engine rumbled to life, and as we pulled onto the road, I stole a glance at him. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and his knuckles were white. For the first few minutes, we drove in silence. I stared out the window, watching the dark trees blur by. Then I started hearing it. A faint noise at first, like a soft thump, barely audible over the hum of the engine. My brow furrowed, and I strained to listen more closely. There it was again, a thud, followed by what sounded like a muffled cry. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaky. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Hear what?" I paused, my heart racing. I was sure I hadn't imagined it. "It sounded like something, in the trunk." He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Probably just some junk rolling around back there. Don't worry about it." But the noise continued. This time, it was louder, clearer. A definite sound of something, or someone, moving in the trunk. My chest tightened, and I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Was there someone trapped back there? I glanced at him again, trying to read his expression, but his face was stone cold, unbothered. "Are you sure it's nothing?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "It's nothing," he repeated, this time with an edge in his tone. I nodded, forcing myself to look away, but my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Something was wrong. Very wrong. As the minutes dragged on, the noises from the trunk grew more frantic, thumps, like fists banging against metal, and muffled screams that made my blood run cold. My mind raced with horrible possibilities. What if he had kidnapped someone? What if he was taking them, and me, to some godforsaken place where no one would ever find us? I couldn't breathe. My hands fidgeted nervously in my lap, and I could feel the panic rising in my throat. I had to get out of this car, but how? We were still on this endless, dark road, with no sign of civilization in sight. If I tried to run, he could catch me easily. I needed a plan. Something. Anything. My mind raced as the car sped down the desolate road, the cold air from outside doing nothing to calm the rising panic twisting in my gut. Every sound from the trunk, those horrifying thumps and muffled cries, drove my anxiety to new heights. I didn't know what was back there, but my instincts screamed that whatever it wasn't good. I tried to stay calm, focusing on the rhythmic crunch of the tires against the frost-laden asphalt. But every thud, every scream, clawed at my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. My body tensed with every bump in the road, and my breathing became shallow. The man next to me kept his eyes on the road, his face impassive, like nothing out of the ordinary was happening. I kept glancing at him out of the corner of my eye, looking for some kind of sign, anything, that would give me a clue about who he really was. He wasn't talking anymore, just driving, his fingers clenched around the wheel like a vice. The dim glow from the dashboard lights flickered across his face, casting eerie shadows that made him look even more menacing. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit there, helpless, while the noises from the trunk grew more frantic by the second. But I was trapped, with no cell service and no idea where I was. My mind flickered between two thoughts. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just as he said, junk rolling around in the trunk. But the muffled screams were too distinct to ignore. No, I wasn't imagining this. As we drove on, I started to notice we weren't going toward any gas station. The road grew even darker, the trees lining the roadside becoming thicker and more foreboding. The panic inside me hit a new level. "I thought you said the gas station was just a few miles away," I managed to say, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. He didn't answer right away. For a long moment, all I heard was the hum of the engine and the steady bump of the tires against the road. Then, he turned slightly, just enough to give me a side glance. "Yeah, it's up ahead." His tone was clipped, almost annoyed, like he was tired of the conversation. "Just relax." But I couldn't relax. The road was too long. Too empty. We hadn't passed a single building or sign in what felt like miles. My fingers dug into the fabric of the seat as I tried to think of an excuse, something that would let me get out of the car before it was too late. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 10 minutes had passed since we'd left my car behind, yet there was no gas station in sight. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I forced myself to take slow, steady breaths, trying to clear my head. I needed to stay calm if I wanted to get out of this. I couldn't just throw myself out of a moving car. But there had to be a way, something I could do. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. But one thought kept surfacing. I had to make him stop the car. The car hit a small bump, and my purse, which I had tucked by my feet, shifted slightly. An idea sparked in my mind. It wasn't foolproof, but it was something. I leaned down casually, reaching into my bag as if I were just looking for something harmless, like a piece of gum or my phone. My hand brushed against the hard metal of my house keys, the small canister of pepper spray attached to them. That was it. I grabbed the pepper spray, my fingers trembling as I wrapped them around the canister. My heart was beating so fast that I thought he might hear it. But I needed to be smart. I couldn't just spray him while the car was moving. It could crash, and I'd be even more helpless. I had to wait for the right moment. "Hey," I said, my voice tight with forced calmness. "I need to go to the bathroom. Could we stop somewhere?" His grip on the wheel tightened. He glanced at me again, his eyes narrowed. "There's nowhere to stop out here. We'll be at the station soon." My stomach twisted, and for a second, I thought my plan had already failed. But I pressed on, hoping to sound more insistent, but not desperate. "Please, I urge, my voice trembling despite my efforts to keep it steady. I really need to go. I can't wait until the gas station. He was silent for what felt like an eternity. I could see his jaw working, muscles tensing as if he was weighing his options. Then, with a grunt of frustration, he muttered, "Fine. We'll pull over." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The thuds from the trunk grew louder, desperate. It was like whoever, or whatever, was back there knew we were about to stop. My mind raced with questions. Was I running out of time? Was this my only chance? The car slowed, and I could see a small clearing just off the road, where he began to pull over. My heart pounded against my ribs as the car came to a stop. The moment he shifted the car into park, I knew it was now or never. I gripped the pepper spray tightly, my thumb hovering over the nozzle as I braced myself for what I had to do. He reached for his door handle, but before he could make a move, I acted. With all the force I could muster, I swung around in my seat and sprayed the pepper spray directly into his face. A scream erupted from him as he jerked back, clawing at his eyes. The car filled with the sharp, burning scent of the spray as he flailed, blinded by the sting. I didn't wait to see how he'd react. I fumbled for the door handle, throwing it open and stumbling out into the freezing night. My legs felt like jelly as I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life. The colder bit at my skin, but I didn't care. My only thought was to get as far away from that car as possible. Behind me, I could hear him screaming, his voice hoarse with rage and pain. He fumbled with the door, and I knew I had seconds before he would be after me. My feet pounded against the icy ground, slipping slightly as I made my way toward the road. In the distance, through the darkness, I saw it, a diner, its neon sign flickering weakly in the night. It was like a beacon of hope, the only sign of life in this desolate stretch of road. I sprinted toward it, my lungs burning, my heart racing. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps heavy and fast, but I didn't look back. The diner was just ahead, and I prayed, God, I prayed, that someone would be inside. With a final burst of adrenaline, I reached the door and yanked it open, throwing myself inside. The warmth hit me like a wall, but I barely noticed. All I cared about was the people inside, the stunned faces of the few late-night diners who looked up as I burst in, gasping for breath. "Call the police!" I screamed, collapsing against the counter. "There's someone in the trunk of his car!" The silence that followed my outburst in the diner was thick, almost suffocating. Everyone inside froze, their eyes wide with shock, forks halfway to their mouths. For a brief moment, no one moved. Then, as if shaken from a trance, the waitress behind the counter sprang into action. She grabbed the phone and started dialing, her hands trembling as she punched in the numbers. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked, her voice quivering as she kept glancing between me and the door. I could barely catch my breath, my chest heaving as I leaned against the counter for support. My legs felt like they were about to give out, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. I wasn't sure if it was the cold or the sheer terror still gripping me. I think he's coming," I managed to choke out, turning toward the door. I was certain the man had followed me, that any second now, he'd burst into the diner, wild-eyed and furious. But the door stayed closed. The waitress was speaking to the dispatcher on the phone, her voice fast and panicked as she relayed what I had just told her. "Yes, she's here now." "No, we haven't seen him yet, but she says there's someone in the trunk of his car. Please hurry." I could feel everyone's eyes on me, curious, concerned, frightened. A middle-aged couple in the corner stared, their faces pale, while a man at the bar set down his coffee slowly, as if trying to process what I had just said. I could hear the low hum of conversation starting up, people murmuring to each other, but I was too focused on the door, too scared to turn away from it for more than a second. Would he come in after me? Was he still out there, circling the diner, waiting for a chance? Or worse, was he dragging whoever was in that trunk out into the woods right now? The thought made me sick to my stomach. Just then, the neon lights outside flickered, casting a faint glow through the front window. For a brief second I saw movement, a dark figure in the shadows, but then it was gone. I swallowed hard, trying to calm the rising tide of panic. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had just happened in the car. The noises from the trunk, his cold, emotionless face, the way he'd so calmly lied about where we were going. I could still hear his screams from when I'd sprayed him with the pepper spray, the way he had clawed at his face in agony. But would that be enough to keep him away? Would he stop, or would he come after me with a vengeance? The door opened suddenly, and I flinched, my heart leaping into my throat. But it wasn't him. Two men walked in, both police officers, their uniforms standing out starkly against the warm yellow glow of the diner's lights. Relief washed over me so powerfully that I almost collapsed. They approached me immediately, their faces serious, but not unkind. "You the one who called?" one of them asked gently. His badge read Officer Grayson. I nodded, trying to hold back the tears that were now threatening to spill over. He's out there," I stammered. "There's someone in his trunk, I heard them. I don't know who, but it's okay," the second officer said, his voice calm and reassuring. "We're going to take care of it. Can you show us the car?" I nodded again, pointing shakily toward the window. "It's a black sedan. He pulled over back there." My voice cracked, but I pressed on. I sprayed him with pepper spray before I ran. He couldn't see." The officers exchanged a quick look, and Officer Grayson's expression grew more serious. "Good thinking. That might have bought you some time." They didn't waste another second. Both officers turned and headed back outside, signaling for backup on their radios as they left. I watched through the diner window as they approached the dark road, flashlights cutting through the blackness. The other patrons were still watching me, their faces tight with worry, but no one said a word. Minutes passed, and the silence inside the diner became unbearable. The air was thick with tension, every creak of the floor, every distant sound outside making me flinch. I couldn't stop staring out the window, waiting for some sign, any sign, that the officers had found the man. That they'd found whoever was in the trunk. Then, faintly, I heard shouting. The officers' voices echoed through the night, and moments later, another set of lights, blue and red, flashed in the distance. More police cars. My heart pounded as I watched them pull up, officers pouring out, and rushing toward the direction where the man's car had been left. I was shaking so hard that the waitress had to guide me to a booth, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder as she offered me a glass of water. I sipped it mechanically, my mind still spinning, still trying to process what had just happened. How had a simple drive home turned into this nightmare? More minutes passed, agonizingly slow. Finally, the door to the diner swung open again, and Officer Grayson stepped inside. His face was grim, but there was a glimmer of relief in his eyes. "We've got him," he said. "He didn't get far. The pepper spray blinded him pretty bad, and he couldn't see to drive. We found him stumbling through the woods a few hundred yards away." I exhaled, my whole body sagging with relief. But there was still one question burning in my mind. "The trunk," I whispered. "Was there someone in the trunk?" Officer Grayson nodded, his expression darkening. "Yeah, there was." The air left my lungs as if I'd been punched. I had been right. There was someone in there. I wasn't just imagining it. "We found a woman," he continued, his voice softer now. "She was tied up, beaten pretty bad, but she's alive. She's being taken to the hospital now." A rush of emotions hit me all at once, relief, horror, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude that I'd gotten out, that I had trusted my instincts. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the horror of what could have happened. What could have happened to that woman if I hadn't gotten away in time? Who is she?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We're still figuring that out," Officer Grayson said, his tone measured. "But from what she managed to tell us, it sounds like she's been missing for a few days. We'll know more once we've had a chance to talk to her." I couldn't speak. I just sat there, staring into the distance, trying to wrap my mind around everything that had happened. The realization that I had escaped something truly terrifying was sinking in, slow and heavy. As the adrenaline began to wear off, exhaustion hit me like a wave. The waitress brought me a cup of coffee, and I sipped it gratefully, letting the warmth calm my frayed nerves. The officers stayed for a while, talking quietly amongst themselves, but they kept their distance, giving me space. I sat there in the booth, surrounded by the muted hum of the diner, trying to piece myself back together. I couldn't help but glance outside every now and then, half expecting to see the black sedan lurking in the shadows. But it was over. The nightmare was finally over. Later, when the police had taken my statement and assured me that I was safe, I was finally able to go home. But the feeling of relief was tinged with something darker, a lingering sense of unease that clung to me, even as I pulled into the familiar driveway of my parents' house. I had escaped. But somewhere out there, people like him still roamed. And that thought would haunt me long after the snow melted and winter gave way to spring.